Well, Brian, we have made it to the point where we actually get to break down an opponent, and we're doing this on the eve of Colorado's season opener against North Dakota State. I know that you had a chance to talk to Andy Riekoff from Bison 1660 out there in Fargo, and he really broke it down. They're pretty excited to be coming out to Boulder.
Yeah, I chatted with him earlier this summer, so it's been a couple months, but yeah, he was a really good one to talk to, and talked a lot about the Bison. I've talked to they have a radio guy out there that interviewed me at Big 12 Media Days, and I've talked to one of their columnists this week. So I think I've got a decent handle on what this North Dakota State team looks like. But like everybody else, going into game one. There's always going to be surprises, and especially an NDSU team that has a brand new head coach. I'm sure there's a lot of questions on their side, like what is this actually going to look like with this new head coach? So we think we have a handle on it, but who knows?
Yeah, we'll dive deep into the Bison. First, a couple things to talk about on Colorado's end of thing. First off, Brian, you were the first to report on this. Burtis Shelby has been added to Colorado's roster as a scholarship addition on the offensive line. So that gives Colorado 79 scholarship players, I believe,
Yeah,
15 on
that's
the
what I've
offensive
got.
line.
Yep.
Yeah. And I don't know a ton about Shelby at this point. Anxious to learn more. No, he's about 6'7", 6'8", in the 285 to 295 range. And he was somebody that holds the shot put record at his high school there in Illinois. So um, I'm anxious to kind of see. Sometimes it's those guys that kind of slip in late under the radar. I remember Jaleel Brown at one point just joined Colorado's roster really late, and he ended up being a future pro. So you never know.
Yeah. Yeah, you never know. And I looked very briefly for him last night. I couldn't find a 24/7 profile on him, but I did find one story, and I think it was from a couple years ago that I think he camped at Illinois, and this reporter was doing a kind of a recap of this camp and like some of the guys that stood out, and mentioned that they were looking at Vertus Shelby. So I don't know really much about him other than that. He was at a prep school in Illinois. So, but I think it's 6'8", 295 pounds for a young guy. It's sort of like we talked about with Yaya Atia when he signed. When you can get a guy like that that's that size and that young, yeah, it's worth a shot to bring him in for a depth piece, work with him, and try to mold him a little bit.
Yeah, especially now too in the transfer portal era, you don't worry about taking chances on guys the way that you used to.
Yeah,
That would be in your program for 4 or 5 years, and if they're not a good player, then you're on some level stuck with them. And I'm not saying that's the case here at all, but it
yeah,
just in terms of some of these late additions have not been guys that have had big time offers other places, and it's like maybe 10 years ago, you could be a little bit more critical about like who are we bringing in here. But even when you look at Colorado's situation, they're still six under that number for this year, and the
yeah.
scholarship limit's going to go up in the future. It sounds like so. Definitely, if you think you can really find potential in a player and you have open scholarships nowadays, you take them on board.
Yeah, definitely. He's worth a flyer and a depth piece. And they've had a couple of guys banged up on the offensive line. And so you add that 15th guy in there, a guy that can give you a good look and some size on the scout team, if nothing else. And I think that's definitely worth it for this year. And if he doesn't pan out, then hey, we've seen 30, 40 guys jump into the portal every year. So, and again, not saying he's going to be one of them, but if he doesn't pan out, the portal is always an option for him or any other guys. So, yeah, it's definitely worth a shot, I think.
Receiver Cordell Russell went in for surgery. He put that on his social media. Dr. McCarty did the surgery there, and this is a situation where because Cordell Russell redshirted last year, you like to have him available, and I know he missed a lot of time this preseason, but you're okay at the receiver position
Yeah.
if you're Jason Phillips and the rest of this offensive staff.
Yeah. I think I look around this team, there's not a lot of areas where I say, man, they're just really thin there. But maybe last year there were some spots like that, but receiver this year is not one of those spots. And I did a radio spot before we did this, and they asked about Cordell Russell, like, is this a big loss? And I said, this is no offense to this young man, but no, it's not.
Yeah.
And the top four guys, we know who they are. They're still healthy. You've still got, Terrell Timmons, Omarion Miller. You've got 6, 7 guys, or 8, 9 that are really good. And Cordell, I think, is one of them. And I'm excited to see him at some point. But yeah, I think the Buffs will be fine without him. But you hope that for his sake, if nothing else, gets healthy soon. And sounds like, from what I hear, he'll get back at some point this year and contribute and have that opportunity. So I look forward to seeing him at some point.
That would be good. Thoughts for a speedy recovery out there for Cordell Russell. All right, let's really dive into these Bison coming out to Boulder to take on the Buffaloes. You mentioned Tim Polasek takes over. He has history there. He was the offensive coordinator at NDSU when they knocked off Iowa in 2016, and spent time recently with Craig Bohl at Wyoming. Anytime there's a first-year head coach, there's a little bit of uncertainty.
Yeah.
But this is somebody that knows that program, that saw it really build up that winning culture when they got into the FCS ranks. And so for that part of it, I think that transition is going to be a little bit smoother than you'd see with most first-year head coaches.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, I think his wife is from there, so I think they went home and closer to family. I believe that's the case. If I'm wrong, I'm sorry, but I believe that's the case. But either way, he is an NDSU guy. He didn't play there, but I think it's 9 years that he was an assistant with NDSU before. So yeah, he knows that culture very well. And again, I do expect there to probably be some bumps along the way for North Dakota State, but their program is so good, and frankly, we'll get into this, but they've already had some bumps through no fault of their own, but some injury that they're having to deal with.
Yeah.
But so that's unfortunate for them. We're not going to see them at their full strength and what they could be, but certainly. It's still a program that you have to have respect for because of what they've done. I mean, last year was a quote down year for them, and they made it to the national semifinals in the FCS. So you have to have respect for them.
All right, I got my mic plugged in now, so clearly not in mid-season form at this point. So hopefully folks were able to hear me there early on. But
hey, by the way, speaking of that, Adam, we always struggle. Like for me, first game, I always feel like I forget how to do this job. And I never remember my binoculars game one. And I was talking to somebody the other day while I was sitting here at my desk and thought about that. I immediately turned around, grabbed my binoculars, and threw them in my bag. So I'm going to have my binoculars game one. So yeah, speaking of that midseason form, I'm never in it for game one. So you're forgiven.
Well, it seems like you have a better start on it than I do so far.
At least I remember. I don't remember the last game one that I remember my binoculars because I just always forget them.
I just keep them in there year round because I would do the same exact thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're especially not so much at Folsom Field, but some of these press boxes, if you don't have binoculars,
Yeah.
I mean, you're really, it's like if 2020 is the best, what's the worst vision? That's kind of what you're doing watching from some of these press boxes if you don't have binoculars.
Yeah, Arizona State. If you don't have binoculars, just don't even go to the press box. I mean,
Yeah.
There's no point in watching.
Yeah. What's interesting about North Dakota State is that power conference opponents were like, no, we're good. We're not scheduling you anymore because they were knocking off FBS teams on a regular basis. I mentioned the win over Iowa in 2016. They did play Arizona a couple of years ago, but since that win over Iowa, Arizona is the only power conference team they've played until when they kick off the game Thursday night against Colorado. And so we got the joke from Coach Prime at Big 12 Media Days about can I get a layup here in the first game? There are the injuries, like you mentioned, and there is a first-year head coach. But this is the second-ranked team in the FCS ranks coming into the season. If you're Colorado, maybe this is good on some level in the sense that you can't sleepwalk into this. And so there maybe is a little bit more of a sense of urgency. Not that you necessarily need that first game, because there's usually those juices that are flowing after a long off season. But if you're going to take a positive away from having North Dakota State in the first game, I guess is a long-winded way of saying that it's going to have your attention because you're going to have to show up and play.
Yeah, absolutely. And You mentioned how long it's been since they've really played one of those teams. That might actually help the Buffs. I mean, you look at North Dakota State's history, and they do have a history, and that makes them scary. But that's a long time ago that they beat those teams. And these guys are on the team now were probably in elementary school or middle school. These guys at North Dakota State don't have that experience of beating FBS teams or really even playing them. Maybe I don't. When did they play Arizona? I don't remember when that was. It was
2 years ago, I think.
Was it 2 years ago? So maybe there's some guys on that team that went down to Tucson. Arizona did win that game, but maybe that's an advantage for the Buffs. But overall, yeah, the antenna has to be up when you're playing a team like this. That regardless of what their history is, they're number 2 in the FCS, so they're a legit team. We talked to Robert Livingston this week, and I asked him about. I said, "Hey, I don't remember if you played a team like this, but did you when you were at William and Mary?" And he goes, "Oh yeah, we did." And he talked about playing senior year. They went to Virginia and they beat Virginia and upset them at their place. So he goes, "I've been in North Dakota State's shoes, and that was our Super Bowl, and that was a really good William and Mary team that I think won 11 games or something like that." And so, but he said that was our Super Bowl. That's how North Dakota State feels, and I know you've talked to people up there as well, but the sense I get is that they are super excited about the opportunity to be on ESPN and go showcase themselves to the world.
Yeah, that's definitely the sense I got as well. There's a lot of excitement leading up to the season opener. Mentioned Tim Polasek comes in, did a pretty good job of keeping that roster together. They did lose one of their star receivers, Eli Green, to the transfer portal. The word with Polasek is physical, and that is kind of already the mantra of NDSU football is we're going to be more physical in the trenches, and he's even, it sounds like, taking that to another level. We'll see what that looks like on Thursday night, but they have a really deep defensive line rotation, and I look at it on the other side of it, and if Colorado's defensive line rotation is what we think their potential is this year, whichever defensive line kind of outperforms the other really makes a big difference in this game, I feel like.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think for me, this is a really big test for the Colorado defensive line. And something that we know they're going to face some better teams overall. But this is because North Dakota State likes to run the ball and they're good at it. I think this is a really good and important test for the Colorado defensive line. And again, with North Dakota State's depth there, it's a really good test for the Colorado offensive line that has been remade, and that's been the big story. Well, it's not the big story around Colorado, but for those covering the team that focus just on the football part of it, that's the big story is the offensive line, right? And we want to see that group. So I think this is a really nice opening test. I don't want to throw these schools under the bus, but like in years past when we've seen CU play a Nickel State, what they were back then, right? UMass, things like that. This is a much better test than what CU's had in some previous FCS games and lower level games. And so I think it's great for the trenches for CU to get a team like North Dakota State.
Cole Wisnowski, I hope I pronounced that correctly, is their All-American safety, out indefinitely, coming back from a foot surgery. It sounds like he might be NDSU's most talented player. This is a guy they project as an NFL draft pick. Hunter Brosio, another All-American. He plays fullback and snapper, an interesting combo there. He's also out. And so you've got a couple key players that are out, like you mentioned earlier. It sounds like they're going to have 2 quarterbacks rotating out there, Cam Miller and Cole Payton. Both guys can run the football. Both guys can pass a little bit, but even Cole Payton is going to be, it sounds like, out there moving around to different spots when he's not at quarterback. So you're going to see some moving pieces offensively. It's going to be kind of hard to key on one guy. It's the consummate team effort, it seems like, at NDSU in terms of just guys being able to be versatile and play a lot of different roles.
Yeah, I'm interested to see what NDSU looks like because Cole Payton, is utilized a lot as a runner. And I've heard him described as sort of a oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the name. Taysom Hill.
Yeah.
Yeah, like that type. Not so much going to throw the ball, but they will run the ball a lot with him. Maybe that short yardage type of back. And who was that kid that was at Oregon State a couple years ago? That Jack Coletto. Remember Jack Coletto?
Yes.
So maybe like that type of, he'll run the ball maybe more than Coletto did. Coletto was really that short yardage specialist, but Sounds like this kid, runs all over the field, and so I mean, he had 600 some yards last year and 13 touchdowns as as a runner. So, but I think Brosio is a big loss. I mean, he was an all conference, all American type kid without even touching the ball. That tells you something about what they feel of him as a blocker. And one of their top running backs, a kid that was I'm blanking on his name and I couldn't pronounce it anyway, but he was projected as their starting running back, may not play this week either. So that'll be interesting. And talking to their people up there, they don't have game-breaking receivers, and so I think it sets up well for Colorado's defense to where we know that they're confident in their corners to play man-to-man coverage, and I think this is going to allow CU to really put their corners on an island against their receivers and pack the box a little bit.
I think it's Barika Pinu. I think the K is silent in his last name. The running back
right.
you're talking about.
Yep.
It sounds like he's been back in practice recently, so going to be kind of a game time decision there.
Yeah.
They do have some other backs that are pretty talented. That's when you're at NDSU, you've always got kind of that stable of backs that you can plug and play in there. It kind of reminds me of Air Force a little bit in that sense.
Right. Yeah. And it sounds like Polisic was saying it's probably a Wednesday decision, which is today, as whether that kid would play or not. But you're right. I mean, they've got guys that can run the football, so I'm not worried about that. They'll still be able to run it. I just think when you're missing that fullback, and a couple of key guys, that could impact a little bit. But I think CU is going to be able to key on the run a little bit.
NDSU is going to have to be able to run the ball successfully to win this football game. That's the one thing we really, really know going into this. Colorado's run defense was pretty suspect in 2023. And so that's where my focus, when you talk about a key to this football game, goes to. If Colorado's, like I said, the defensive line, if they outperform what NDSU does on their defensive line, then Colorado wins this game, I think, going away. Obviously, the linebackers are going to have to play a key role, but it's really on those guys up front to win this football game defensively for Colorado, because they're going to score points offensively. There's enough firepower on this Colorado team.
Yeah, and it's one of those games that I feel like, it's sort of like when the Buffs play Air Force, and Air Force is going to get their rushing yards, right? And so, do you really judge the run defense if they give up 200 yards on the ground against Air Force? I mean that's pretty standard. Like NDSU, I feel like they're going to get their rushing yards because that's what they do. But to me, the key is how the Buffs are in the red zone. And I don't think it matters if NDSU has long sustained drives where they're getting, 4 or 5 yards a pop on the ground. But if CU can hold them in the red zone and force field goals, CU is going to win this game. I feel like a key for NDSU is they've got to have those longer drives that end in touchdowns, not field goals. And so I'm going to be looking more at what does CU do close to the end zone on defense. Can they keep them out of the end zone and force field goals? And if they can do that, I think they'll be all right.
It's time, Brian. Prediction time for the first time in a very long time. How do you see Thursday night's game shaking out?
Yeah, I've given the prediction a couple other places now, so I'll stick with it. But I'm going Buffs 34-24, which is, that covers. I think the line is 9.5. That covers. Part of that is that I have it somewhat close is that, I've got respect for NDSU and what that program is. And even when they haven't beaten these FBS teams, they keep it close. When they went down to Tucson a couple years ago, I think it was a 3 or 7 point game, something like that. So they were right there. So I have respect for that. I talked to an NDSU columnist this week that he was like, I've got CU winning by 3 touchdowns, and he told me, he goes, this is the weakest NDSU 2 DP seen in years. And so maybe I'm giving NDSU too much credit, but I'm going to go 34-24. How about you?
I'm going to be similar to what you're talking about in terms of this being a competitive football game. I could see it being like a 7-point game at halftime, but I do think that Colorado's offensive firepower and just seeing some of those key injuries happen to NDSU. And I do think that what we hear about NDSU is that they wear other teams down late. I think it's actually going to come out a little bit differently this week. And there's so much pressure on this Colorado football team, Brian. It wouldn't surprise me if that first half of the first quarter kind of looks clunky from Colorado and NDSU is able to make some big plays, just because there is so much when you get out there and you get the juices maybe rubbed up too much. But I think as Colorado settles into this football game, their offensive firepower is going to kind of shine through when they win this game. I'm going to go 38-21, but
Okay.
really nothing. I would be surprised if Colorado loses this football game, but I wouldn't even be surprised if it's a little bit closer than that. Again, to your point, just having respect for NDSU and they haven't had a lot of power conference opponents in the last decade, but historically, this is just a program that gets up for these type of games. So you can't completely ignore that, even though it's a little bit further back in the past.
Yeah, I agree with you, and yeah, and I also agree that maybe the early part looks a little clunky, but it would be nice to see Colorado get off to a good start because that was one of the things that plagued them last year is that their offense just didn't look good early in games and they sputtered a little bit early on. So it'd be nice to see you came out just firing, and put up something big. I'm curious to see how their receivers match up against NDSU's secondary and if Shedeur can pick them apart and if he does, if that's an advantageous matchup for Colorado, then I think it could be a long night for NDSU and a really nice statistical night for Shedeur Sanders.
It should be a fun football game, though.
Yeah.
I think the contrasting styles makes for entertainment, even though, maybe you'd like for a UNC, Northern Colorado to come in and kind of have a little bit more like Coach Prime was talking about a layup in this first game. But from an entertainment value, this is a pretty awesome way to kick off the season.
It is. And I'll say from an entertainment value, I want to ask you a question. What's your prediction on who's actually there from the entertainment world? Are we going to get a concert as, someone famous singing a song, bringing them out like Lil Wayne did last year, what's your prediction entertainment wise?
I want to see Ralphie get to the 50. Let's start there.
Nice, safe prediction. I like that.
Well, last year you couldn't predict who was going to be there. I never would expect that as a Celtics fan, Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett would be on the sideline. And so I don't know. I'm anxious to see. It's funny talking with the NDSU guys is they're like, are we going to get to meet The Rock when we're out there? It's like, probably not. But
well,
The Rock has been in Boulder before, and I have given him a fist bump.
He has been there, and hey, you might beat Goldberg. There's a decent chance of that. I did not expect to have a conversation with Dr. J on the sideline at Folsom Field last year. So yeah, you never know. As a Yankees fan, seeing CC Sabathia out there last year, I mean, just connections that Coach Prime has. That you're like, huh, how does he know this guy? It's yeah. I put you on the spot there, but it's really impossible. It's impossible to project who in the world is going to be at the Buffs game. So that's one of the fun parts about pregame is who's going to be there.
And Coach Prime does like some of that secrecy, right? He doesn't like talking about who's going to show up. And we still don't know what the uniforms are going to look like. We'll obviously find out Thursday night because they got to roll out there with some type of uniform. But he kind of likes playing it that way.
Yeah, and I had a sort of a tradition last year of a nice photo of a special teamer because they were the first ones out. So tomorrow night on Twitter, look for my photo of probably a long snapper wearing the uniforms and debuting those.
Gabe Landers, step up. Brian Howell is ready for your photo.
I ought to set up some sort of NIL. Well, I couldn't do it, but maybe there should be some NIL deal with Camden Dempsey where he models the new uniform every night and every week, and as he walks out first, he's got to come with something like that. The governor introduces the new uniform.
I love it. All right, Brian, I'm going to see you out at Folsom Field early. I'm sure we're going to try to beat a lot of the crowds getting in there. It's going to be a crazy day on campus. If you're going to the game, try to get there extra early because school is in session and it's going to be very congested. So I don't know. Our thing, Brian, is we'd like to put on classical music if we get stressed out. So maybe some folks need to define it. What is it? 88 point something FM and find your serenity, but get to Folsom Field early. Excited, Brian. We're going to be doing a post-game analysis video pretty soon. It's been a minute from that since we've done that last. Any parting thoughts as we sign off and get ready for the season opener?
No, I'm just looking forward to doing a post-game analysis with you because it has been a long time, and it's been a long time since we've done one after a win, and so. we try to be objective reporters, but it's always nicer when we cover a win. It's been a very long time. It'd be nice to do a post-game analysis after a win tomorrow night.
All right, we'll see if we can do that Thursday night. Brian, appreciate you. And everybody, again, get excited because the football season is finally here.